All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. Hey, you guys, Daniel Larison has a Substack, and he also writes at Responsible Statecraft. This one is called Biden's Iran Policy Makes No Sense. Italic's mine. Welcome to the show, Daniel. How you doing, bud?
Doing all right, Scott. Thanks. Thanks for having me back on.
Very happy to have you here. So, Biden, Iran, and policy, I don't like where this is going at all. I guess the deal is that Obama had made the Iran deal, the JCPOA, the extra layer of inspections and reassurances on Iran's civilian nuclear program. Then Trump got us out of it in 2018. Then Biden became president in 2021. And the idea was that maybe he would get us back into the deal that, after all, his staff had signed. It was, Blinken and Sullivan had both helped with the Iran deal back when it was the Iran deal. But then now here we are in March of 2023, and that has not been done. And you seem to think things are getting even worse here. Is that right?
It's not looking good right now. We keep hearing, especially from the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Tom Nides, a lot of talk about backing Israel to the hilt, essentially greenlighting whatever it is they want to do about Iran's nuclear program, and basically giving very strong indications that we're not going to do anything to get in their way if they decide they want to go off and start bombing Iranian facilities. And he said it one time last month, and that was worrisome enough. And then he repeated it again at another event, I think just last week. And then he also paired that with remarks that he made, and this is what I was talking about in the column, that basically there's no point in negotiating with Iran, or there's simply not going to be any negotiations with Iran while they're doing other things that the U.S. disapproves of. So whether it's cracking down on protesters or providing weapons to the Russians or what have you. And so that it's essentially linking the fate of these negotiations to other things that Iran may be doing in the world that have nothing to do with the nuclear program, nothing to do with the nuclear issue at all, but which are, I guess, politically embarrassing or potentially embarrassing for the administration if they go ahead with diplomacy with Iran while those other things are going on.
Yeah.
And so I was saying that the policy doesn't make any sense because, for one thing, diplomatic path is the best and really only way to constrain the nuclear program in Iran. If that is in fact what you want to do, you have to keep pressing ahead with the diplomatic path because all of the other alternatives can't work. And indeed, we've already seen how sanctions and sabotage actually backfire and produce more of what people say they don't want, as Iran's nuclear program has only expanded in response to those things. So if Biden and his people really do want to get the U.S. back into the deal, and they do want to keep Iran's nuclear program under limits, and presumably they don't really want a new war. You would think they wouldn't want a new war. That can't be very popular if they were to get us into a war in the Middle East. Then it stands to reason that they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, which is constantly reassuring the Israelis and giving them green lights and encouraging them to take whatever action they see fit. And so I was, in the column, I was spelling this out and trying to urge the administration, not that anybody in the administration is listening to me, but to say that we need to be going in the opposite direction of where we're going. We need to be actively discouraging the Israelis from taking any actions, and we need to be moving away from this talk of military options, because we know that those options are bankrupt. We know those options are going to backfire, just like all of the other hawkish options have backfired. So I'm concerned about this drift that we're seeing towards conflict, and the failure to rein in the Israelis when that's what needs to be happening.
Yeah. Well, so get back to the Israelis in just a second, but it really is, a huge part of this, as you say, is just domestic politics, like even on the surface level kind of TV politics, the embarrassment of making a deal when America's so powerful and the Ayatollah is so evil and our Israeli friends hate him so much. That's always part of it. And so someone is going to call them a wimp for making a deal with a guy who's a bad guy who, after all, did that other bad thing that we're upset about. And they're not willing to take that hit in terms of just political capital on the most crass sense, the way that Obama was willing to fight for it back then, right?
Seems to be the case. One of the things that I've been banging this drum now for over 2 years is that Biden seems very wary of provoking hawkish backlash. He will go out of his way not to invite that kind of opposition. He caters to domestic hawks, both within his party and outside it. And we've seen this on other issues too. It's not just the Iranian one. He'll keep Trump era policies in place that he campaigned against, that he said were failures, but he won't change them because he thinks that the cost at home, in terms of the coverage that he gets or the attacks that come from the other side, are too damaging. But it's not worth it to try to make these changes to policies, even though he knows full well that the current policies aren't working and have in fact done real harm, both to our interests and to the people in those other countries. So it's this old defensive crouch that we see so often, especially from Democratic presidents who are paranoid about being accused of weakness and who will do anything they can not to appear weak, which of course actually makes them seem much weaker than they ever would have if they had just stuck by their guns and tried to get their own agenda enacted. Uh,
Seriously. And apparently no one ever tells them that. you know? It's so
well,
funny.
yeah, it seems like they don't think about it through to the next step.
Yeah.
They don't want to be labeled as weak, so they end up cowering in front of their domestic opponents and let those people dictate their agenda for them.
Absolutely
And
right.
so it's no wonder we end up with such a bunch of lousy policies when so many of the people that know that they don't work still feel compelled to keep those policies in place, uh, just because they're afraid.
Yep. Man, and then, it's really frustrating to me too. The mechanism of sabotage here, Daniel, is just, oh, well, what about Hezbollah? Or some kind of lazy thing. You just tack extra sentence or paragraph on that says that, well, other issues besides the nuclear issue have to be part of the negotiations. And that then just prevents them from happening at all. That's just it. It's like, putting sugar in the gas tank. Whole thing's over.
Right, and they're and it's pretty clear that that's always what's behind it. The desire to add these poison pills to the talks to create uh, or to include demands that you already know in advance the other side can't possibly accept, uh, and that are really irrelevant to the issue at hand. It's a way of trying to derail things before they even get started. And to the credit of the Obama administration, they understood that when
Mm,
they negotiated the agreement in the first place, which is why they kept it so narrowly focused on just the nuclear issue, and they refused to let anything else get included. Because once you start including those other things, then you're opening up a huge mess for yourself. Because it's hard enough to resolve even one issue with a government that doesn't trust you and that you don't trust,
mm,
and to try to fix everything all at once, when even that one issue is extremely difficult, is you're setting yourself up for failure,
right.
which is of course what the hardliners always want in these situations. They want to set the bar for success so high that no one can ever get over it,
Hmm.
because they see their interests, the hardliners' interests, as being tied up in conflict, anything that makes conflict less likely is therefore undesirable for them.
Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, the subject matter here is, are they or are they not going to enrich up to weapons grade and put together some atom bombs and possibly threaten Israel with them, supposedly? And you would think that they would just say, man, we really should get a deal and lock that program down the way that they did. And in fact, if you took the JCPOA, it had some sunset provisions and things like that. But if you just took like all other things equal, all lobbying and weird disincentives out of it, and just say you had a decent president in there, he might have said, hey, Ayatollah, I really would like if we could retire these sunsets and go ahead and make some of these provisions permanent. And you know what? Maybe we could make a deal on missile range. Maybe we could make a deal on support for Hezbollah, and you give them maybe only these kinds of weapons, but not those. Maybe we could have actually pursued further diplomacy if they had just stuck with the dang nuclear deal in the first place as the basis of it and actually taken care of their concerns. Because if you follow the logic, Daniel, if the whole thing breaks down, and the Ayatollah does what apparently they want him to do, which is move towards a nuke so that they can attack, well, what do they think is going to happen? They're going to get a perfect regime change and a loyal client state? Or the next Ayatollah, or maybe even still this one, is finally going to then make a nuke? And that'll be, what, within 6 months or a year or 2 years of the attack. We'll end up getting them the nuke that the supposed thing is supposed to stop. So it's hard to take any of this seriously. You know what I mean? They must know what they're doing here.
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the people that talk about using sabotage operations or using military attacks to, quote unquote, stop Iran's progress know that they're not going to stop it. They know that they're going to accelerate it. And that's certainly what happened in the case of the Ozark attack in the 80s against Iraq when they attacked that reactor.
Mm-hmm.
That actually convinced the Iraqi government that they really needed to get serious about building nuclear weapons. Excuse me, and that they needed to do it quickly, and so that military action very directly contributed to a growing danger of Iraq gaining nuclear weapons, which, of course, then the post-Gulf War settlement and inspections and all of that ended up stopping. But
right.
But in terms of the Israeli action, the Israelis actually made the problem far worse for themselves and for everybody by resorting to these sorts of bankrupt tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And now now we're talking about doing it on an even larger scale with a much larger program, more sophisticated program, and it's simply nuts, as you say. It will guarantee, or pretty much guarantee, proliferation while pretending to prevent it. And so this is why I always marvel at people who talk about military options as somehow being a tolerable or even useful alternative to the diplomatic path, because we can already see how it's going to go down based on what we've seen in the past and based on what we understand about the nature of these programs in governments like this. Obviously, you have the North Korean example where they went ahead and did acquire nuclear weapons and have essentially bought themselves security by doing so. And the Iranians will probably conclude, if they get attacked, they will conclude that the North Koreans were right to go the way that they did, and then will choose to imitate them. And we're at this point, the Israelis and the U.S. government are giving them every incentive to draw that conclusion when it's exactly what you don't want them to conclude.
Yep. And I've often compared the latent nuclear deterrent they have here to having a gun in one pocket and some bullets in the other pocket. They're like, hey, don't make me load my gun, man. We're getting along fine right now. There's no need to escalate toward actually arming up because we're not fighting, are we? We got a fight going on. That's essentially the posture here. And so, keep an unloaded gun in one pocket and the bullets in the other. That sounds to me like a good place to call the status quo timeout, and let's lock that down in an agreement. You guys keep your enrichment at less than weapons grade, and we will stop attempting to starve your people into submission.
Yeah, I mean, I think a deal is still reachable. I think that they could find a way to get back to the original compromise that they had. But to do that, there has to be a, a really concerted effort to deliver on the benefits for the Iranian side. Well, one of the reasons I think that the Iranian government has been dragging its feet a little bit since the new president came in is that they believe that, and they have reason to believe, that the U.S. can't be trusted to honor its promises. And if they get sanctions relief as part of a new agreement, uh, how much of that sanctions relief is actually going to be delivered? How much are they actually going to get out of it before the agreement is then canceled again by a future administration? And so they have a legitimate reason to be wary of jumping back into an agreement like this when they have been shafted in the past. So, I think there is still a chance to get that agreement, but the onus is on our side, on the Biden administration, to prove that to them. And I think one of the things that they would have to do to actually get the Iranians over the line and to recommit on their side is by offering them some sanctions relief up front as a goodwill gesture, as a way of showing that they're serious about actually delivering on their promises. And maybe that would break the impasse that they're currently in, because as of right now, I don't think the Iranians are going to make to take the leap of faith, so to speak, to get things going again when they see all they see is the U.S. piling on more and more sanctions on their oil sector. They were even adding more in just the last few weeks. And what message does that send them? It sends them the message that they may as well get used to being under these sanctions indefinitely, because there's no flexibility on the U.S. side.
Hang on just 1 second. Hey, y'all, the audiobook of my book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, is finally done. Yes, of course, read by me. It's available at Audible, Amazon, Apple Books, and soon on Google Play and whatever other options there are out there. It's my history of America's war on terrorism from 1979 through today. Give it a listen and see if you agree. It's time to just come home. Enough Already. Time to End the War on Terrorism. The audiobook. Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education. All right, so tell me what you thought of this headline. You must have seen it already today. Saudi Arabia and Iran agree to reestablish ties in talks hosted by China.
Right. Yeah, and it's an interesting story. The Saudis and the Iranians have been talking for some years now, trying to work back towards resuming normal relations after they broke down in 2016. The Saudis broke off relations. There was a riot in Iran that targeted the Saudi embassy in Tehran in response to the execution of a Shia cleric in Saudi Arabia by the Saudi government, which of course angered a lot of people in Iran, especially because the execution was for obvious reasons of persecution and to suppress Shiites in Saudi Arabia. And that's where the breakdown started. And the Saudi government eventually realized that their policy of stoking animosity and hostility towards Iran wasn't having any benefits for them. and gradually I started moving towards repairing these relations. And so you had talks in Iraq, you had talks facilitated by Oman, I think. And then the Chinese got in on it as well, and they're the ones that hosted these latest negotiations that took place this week. And they finally hammered out this new normalization agreement, which is just a commitment to reopen their embassies and have normal relations like they had before the breakdown. So it's not, it's not one of these great diplomatic achievements. It's sort of the bare minimum of normal relations. But they hadn't had that for 7 years, and now they will have it again. And so I think that's good news in terms of regional stability. It's good news uh, for uh, possibly for Yemen if this then leads to more flexibility from the Saudis and the Iranians on that front as well. And it should, if the U.S. handles it correctly, it should also provide an opening for us to try to resume our own negotiations with Iran. Because I think this shows that the Iranian government is open to uh, to some compromise. They are open to talks, provided that they're dealing with people that they can actually deal with, uh, and that are willing to deal with them. So all around, I think it's a good development. I think the Chinese role here is probably going to be weaponized by people who don't like China to try to make it into something dangerous or scary to make people worried about it. But I'm not concerned about that at all. I think if the Chinese are able to facilitate something like this, and our government isn't because we're so locked into these rivalries, that should tell us something about the folly of our current position, and the folly of our decision not to have normal relations with Iran for all these decades. When China can act as a mediator and actually achieve something useful by having good relations with both countries. That's the sort of relationship that the U.S. should be aspiring to have with both countries. Not one where we play favorites, not one where we arm anyone to the teeth, but where we have a cordial working relationship.
Yep.
And as of right now, of course, we have no relationship with Iran, and we have a far too close relationship with the Saudis. And so we should strive to rebalance that.
Man, I don't know. You're such a moderate and conservative type of a personality. I mean, to me, this is beyond the worst embarrassment. This is an absolute disgrace. I mean, United States of America's been helping Saudi explode babies to death in Yemen for 7 years straight. Well, they finally stopped for the last year, more or less, but before that, for 7 years straight, and killed hundreds of thousands of people, just as the Obama government told the New York Times to placate the Saudis because they were doing the Iran deal. Then Trump tears up the Iran deal, keeps the genocide, kills all these people. So it's not just that. Obviously, America's role in the world should be going around hosting peace conferences and trying to prevent violence from breaking out. Not making promises, but hosting others to work out their differences, at least, And instead, we got the Chi-Coms doing it when we're on the side of the worst, most belligerent, bloody, genocidal faction in all of this. And the Saudis even backed the Sunni insurgency against our guys in Iraq War II when W. Bush had them on the side of the Shiites. I mean, these guys are a menace. And I just don't know, as the kids say these days, Daniel, cringe, right? Like it's the cringiest thing in the whole damn world that Beijing is coming in and doing what the United States of America should be all about in the first place, and none of the rest of this instead, you know?
Well, right. I mean, that's why. I mean, we ought to be getting out of the arrangement we have with the Saudis. We should have been doing that years ago, long before the opening for others to come in and do this sort of mediating work presented itself. But if this is sort of embarrassment, if people want to think about it as an embarrassment, if this embarrassment is what it takes to wake us up to the stupidity and the cruelties of our policies in the Middle East, then maybe that can have a good effect in the end. We should have realized a long time ago that our government shouldn't be so deeply involved with the Saudis as it has been. But maybe this will finally force us to realize that they're going to do whatever they're going to do. We don't have uh, a hold on them, despite all of the military assistance, all of the enabling, all of the coddling and protection that we provided them. Uh, they're they're not going to behave in the way that Washington wants them to necessarily. So just cut them off. Stop with the indulgence and the enabling behavior that has implicated the U.S. in so many terrible crimes. Uh, and so that's why I think we need to disentangle ourselves from them and get back to having more normal relations with all states in the region, which would preclude us from taking sides as the way we have done.
Hmm. Tell me, Daniel, what did you think of the vote in the House on the War Powers resolution on Syria
Oh
the other
yeah,
day?
yeah. Well, of course, it was a disappointing result. We saw, I think, about three-quarters of the House voting against the resolution. Uh, Slightly more Republicans voting against it than Democrats, but it was a bipartisan uh, showing in the rejectionist camp, and it's a shame because the mission in Syria, the deployment in Syria that we have right now, is the most clear cut example of, or well, one of the most clear cut examples of an illegal war currently going on in the world. One that has not been authorized by Congress, that has no international mandate, has absolutely no justification whatsoever. And so it should be a layup for a War Powers Resolution challenge. It's exactly the kind of thing that War Powers Resolution was created to oppose, where the president sends troops into a war zone on his own without congressional approval and keeps them there for years on end while they come under fire and while they engage with other forces, including groups that have absolutely nothing to do with threats to the United States. Pro government forces aligned with the Syrian government, Iranian backed militias, Russian mercenaries. None of these people has anything to do with our national security, and our people have no business being there. And so it is disappointing to see that such a huge bloc in the House simply doesn't care about that and doesn't care about their constitutional responsibilities. It's I guess it's not really that surprising that so many of them have uh, refused to do their duty, since we know members of Congress are famously allergic to taking responsibility for these sorts of policies. But it is still discouraging to see how few people there were in favor of what really should have been a slam dunk, uh, both on the constitutional side and on the policy side, to get those troops out.
Yeah.
Um, I'm uh, I'm I'm sorry to see it, and I would think it is a bit strange that there was so much more support for getting us out of the business of backing the war in Yemen, and of course it was absolutely right to do that, to try to end our involvement. Uh, but here, where we actually have troops on the ground, we have troops occupying foreign territory in violation of international law and without congressional authorization. This, for some reason, does not excite the same outrage. It does not seem to generate the same opposition as backing for the Saudis did. And so it's a little curious to me that same coalition that has been fighting to get us out of the war in Yemen did not show up for this vote. And it would be interesting to dig into why that is.
Well, I mean, part of it was we just didn't have time to build up a movement at all, right? Gates announced the thing, and then later that week they voted on it. So there had been a thing
Sure.
before where I talked with Eric Sperling from Just Foreign Policy, and he talked about how it wasn't a war powers resolution. They were trying to get an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act, and that they had put together quite a coalition of votes there. I think they did even better this time on short notice. So, but also in Yemen, you're talking. Well, I mean, the worst of the Syrian war ended at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. But the Yemen war was still going on up until a year ago, and you had a situation where this total blockade on their seaports and their airports, and starvation, and babies dying of cholera, and all this stuff. In a way, that Syria was really bad, and Obama sent his legions of suicide bombers and everything, but it wasn't quite the same dynamic there, where people are just starving to death and stuff like the way it was in Yemen. It's the way it still is in Yemen.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that could explain part of it. There was and is a dire humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and that
Oh,
has
which, by the
been.
way, not that I'm telling you anything you don't know. For people who don't know, Daniel, you've been great on Yemen. It's good or better than anyone this whole time. So, for
Well,
people who aren't
thanks.
familiar with that,
I would. Yeah, I mean, I wish it had made more of a difference, but um, yeah, but thanks. And so, yeah, of course, there has been a dire humanitarian crisis in Yemen for now coming up on 8 years, and that crisis has been severely exacerbated and really driven by the Saudi coalition intervention, and the policies that they have instituted in pursuit of that war, both in terms of the blockade, as you say, and also the economic policies that they've instituted through the government that they prop up. So it's so I can see how the humanitarian crisis uh, would spur many people to action, whereas in the Syrian case, it's not. Uh, Maybe there's not the same feeling of urgency in the Syrian case as there is in Yemen. But I think the legal case for getting the troops out is even more
right?
airtight
Yeah,
in the Syrian
absolutely.
case.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about it primarily in terms of war powers, more than just in terms of the policy, uh, the Syria one is the one that you would go to where you have the strongest argument, I think, because Congress never debated and never voted on sending these troops in. It still hasn't, all
Yeah.
this time later. And they've now been there in one capacity or another for coming up. It'll be 9 years, I think,
Right.
this year.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's funny too,
and
because
so
they
that's
act like in that debate, they act like we've always been there and we always will be. And of course, America occupies Syria. But I remember a time when America did not occupy Syria, and invading and occupying
right.
Syria would have been a really big deal. And then staying forever, like at South Korea and all of this, like really when the government in Damascus says, beat it, please. And when as everybody knows, it was America and our allies that built the ISIS caliphate that they had to go there to destroy. But even then, Barack Obama had to swear no boots on the ground. We're only going to use air power in Syria. We're going to leave it up to, the Kurds. And even, I guess he was implying eventually Assad to reestablish his monopoly on force in that country. No boots on the ground. And then broke that promise. But that was how he had to make the promise in order to extend Iraq War III into Syria in the first place. Was, look, Daniel, we would never put boots on the ground there. Everybody knows that. That would be crazy, right? Now here we are, as you say, 9 years later almost. And the idea is that we would remove our boots from the ground there? Are you insane? Huh? Don't you know we have to? They literally, one of the Republicans said this. We have to fight them over there so that we don't have to fight them here.
Right, and of course it's useful that they don't ever really have to specify who the them is in that uh, in that argument,
Yeah, exactly. Because
because
America backs all the terrorists in the Idlib province right now, the Al Qaeda danger to the world, us and our Turkish friends there, us being the U.S. government, not me, but you know what I mean.
right, and well, and a lot of the people that our troops are coming in contact with in Syria have are not involved in any of that. Right? I mean, you have when you have these drone attacks or rocket attacks on U.S. bases in Syria, it's usually coming from people that are there to fight on the side of the Syrian government, uh, and so even the fig leaf excuse that they're there in some sort of anti-terrorist capacity doesn't actually tell you what they're really doing there. It doesn't it's not an accurate or honest assessment of why they're still there. Basically, they're there. I mean, as far as I can tell, the guys, especially the guys at Tanf, are just there to serve as target practice until we will eventually get some sort of shooting war with the Iranians going. I don't really understand what anyone hopes. I mean, beyond that, I don't know what anyone's hoping to accomplish. It seems like it's just a deployment for its own sake at this point. Um, and so the logic of keeping them there is bizarre in my mind. I really don't know what people could be thinking, unless it is just to keep creating pretext for more conflicts down the road. I don't know what else it could be for.
Well, I've heard them rationalize, Daniel, that, well, by depriving them of their oil money, we make their reconstruction harder, and we just make times tougher for them. And sometimes they say, even though the cause for this was Assad's alliance with Iran, now they've made Syria more dependent on Iran than ever before. And they go, oh, yeah, but see, that's what's good about it, is because this is a drain on Iran's economy, that they have to support their Syrian friends. And so the negative effect, the opposite effect of what they were going for, is now the rationalization that it's working.
Right. Well, and you have this paired up with, of course, a horrendous sanctions policy that punishes people in Syria and in the government-controlled areas, and does block their ability to rebuild and their ability to recover from the war, and it's quite deliberate to make those parts of Syria as unlivable as possible by threatening anybody that does business with them with secondary sanctions. That's it's another one of these maximum pressure economic wars, and the victims of those wars are the people that the ordinary people that live in that country. The people in the government and their cronies will do just fine, and they have been doing just fine this whole time. And that's the way it always goes with these things. And so, I know, even if we think of it in terms of being a punitive policy, the people being punished by that policy are not the war criminals or the people at the top. It's always the people that are most vulnerable and weakest that get it in the neck.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Well, listen, I've kept you long enough. I'll let you go about your Friday afternoon, but I sure do appreciate your time again on the show, Daniel. Been great.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
All right, you guys, that is Daniel Larison. He's at Responsible Statecraft, and he's at Substack. His blog there is called Eunomia. I think I said that right.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.